Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We are glad that you're joining us today. We have Emma Petty Adams, who is our co-executive director of MWEG, and we have Sarah Perkins, who is our root director of peacemaking. And they're going to talk to us today, give a little update on MWEG, maybe a little post-election, what's next steps. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Emma.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming. It's good to see you. Sarah and I are going to talk a bit today about peacemaking, about some myths about what peacemaking is and isn't. But I wanted to start by just kind of walking you through some of the experiences that I have had with MWEG over the past little bit as we've prepared for this election. And what I'm hoping to do is to just let you know and express and validate like a wide range of emotions and experiences around the election. I think as we've talked to our members and our leaders and our volunteers over the past 36 hours, I think the reality is that you're covering a bit of a spectrum of emotions, and you're all experiencing the election and the pre and the post and such in different ways. And we just want to, I guess, upfront kind of validate that there's a wide range and that there's a lot of emotions out there, including a lot of fear and anxiety, stress, and such. And all of that is perfectly okay, normal, acceptable, and we're here, as peacemakers to be able to catch the full spectrum of emotions. That's something that Sarah and I are going to talk about in a little bit, is that sometimes there's a myth that peacemaking means that you don't have any strong emotions, that they're all just very much, sweet and simple and easy to work through. And that's not the case at all. In fact, it's the opposite. And every one of us processes differently. And so I want to also acknowledge that some people are going to want to take more time to be talking about how they're feeling, and then others are getting texts from people who are like, what can I do? Put me to work right now. What do you want me to do next, Emma? And so I think that's the reality as well. I wanted to validate that. So I just want to share a little bit personally in this role as executive director, how I've experienced preparation for the election. And then I think many members of the MWEG team as well, but I don't want to speak for all of them. The reality is that, our job running this organization is to be aware and be planning for a lot of different scenarios at all times. We're always trying to plan ahead. We're always trying to think about, what could happen next, both, in the national political scene, as well as in all the various states and localities we're working in. We're always trying to think about, what can we do to plan as an organization to have the resources and the connections and the that we need in order to really fulfill MWEG's potential and do our very best to play a role as peace builders and as pro-democracy actresses in the world. And because of that, over the past year in particular, I've had access to a lot of different scenario planning about this election. Good, bad, ugly, everything in between, depending upon how you view it. And because of that, I've really had to, over the course of the past year, process a lot of emotions about where we would be at this moment. I've had to kind of come to terms with multiple scenarios, some that I was happy about, some that I wasn't, and just kind of work through those ahead of time, if that makes sense. So here we are today, and I've had to process a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, even some anger about where we might be over a long period of time. Now, this has been a real gift to me personally, because then we get to the moment that we are, and I'm feeling things, and but I'm able to kind of, focus on working on next steps. But I did want to focus for a minute on fear, because that is definitely one that I have experienced. And I've experienced in lots of different contexts in terms of where we are in our national political scene. I've experienced it in the context of who could potentially be in power, who was in power, also in the context of the division and polarization, and just seeing the way that we treat one another oftentimes actually has brought me a lot of fear. I've been so worried that no matter what the outcome was going to be from this election, it seemed like the inevitable was division and hatred. and sometimes even violence, frankly. There's a lot of scenarios which have played out around violence. So as I've tried to kind of acknowledge that in myself and kind of figure out how I could both like react to it and use it as useful information, um, but try to let it consume me, I just wanted to share something that really, really was helpful for me. And that is in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. I'm going to read verse 7, and then I'm going to go back and read 5 through 6. And verse 7 is the one that we always read or hear about. And it says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind." Now, I think you could read that a lot of different ways. You could say, okay, if you're feeling fear, it's not coming from God. I think that's a bit of a reductionist view of it. I don't think it's God saying that you can't feel fearful. I don't think it's saying that you shouldn't feel fear. I think it's just recognizing that you can feel it, but then kind of use it in a different way. But that when we work through it, we can actually find power and love and a sound mind. Okay, so let's go back then to verses 5 and 6. So this is Paul talking to Timothy, and he says to him, "When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also." So he's talking to Timothy about Timothy's grandmother and mother. And then he says, "Wherefore I put thee in remembrance that thou stir up the gift of God, which is in thee by the putting on of my hands." And then he goes on to talk about this spirit of fear. And I was just really, really, really struck by this unfeigned faith that Paul identifies, who was modeled by who, but Timothy's mother and grandmother. I think, I personally love to look for those examples of women in the scriptures, and this is a beautiful one. So I really hadn't noticed it before now that Paul was inviting Timothy to remember the examples of the women in his life as he was preparing him to say, let's have sound mind and not so much fear. And so it was really inspiring to kind of pause and reflect on what Paul was describing as the imagery invoked by the words dwelt and unfeigned. And so as I was like reading this and I was thinking about you all, and I was thinking about MWEG and the work ahead, here's the vision. Here's what came to mind for me. It was envisioning you women embodying a quality of genuine, sincere, and earnest faith. That is who I have had in my mind over this past year as I've tried to work through the fear of what was ahead. And I just want you to know that I have been able to move through feelings of fear and anxiety and anger and into ones of peacemaking because of you and my experiences with you and my interactions with you and my knowledge of who you are. I see you as women who intuitively draw upon a power that dwells. So think of that word dwell. It dwells deep in your souls. It's motivated by love, and you are equipped with strong minds capable of reasoning and discernment. And so that for me has been a real key factor in being able to dive deep into some really scary scenarios about our future. Dive deep into some dark planning and thinking about what was to come, but then also somehow managing to feel a sense of peace and commitment to peacemaking in the middle of all of that. So I just want to tell you that I think that you have an inherent resourcefulness that is born of oftentimes necessity and pragmatism. But I think it equips you with a distinct power and a capacity to lead from a place of determination rather than dominance. That's how I see you as the woman of MWEG. That's how you have shown yourself and revealed yourself to us as leaders over the past while. And so when I think of you and I envision you and I work with you, that is what gives me the capacity to move forward and to with a sound mind and determination. So this all leads me to peacemaking, my friends, because I have had peacemaking on my mind nonstop this week, pre-election, during election, post-election. And I think we need a little primer on what peacemaking is and what peacemaking isn't in particular. So we brought in the expert, Sarah Perkins, MWEG's Director of Peacemaking, and she and I are going to walk through with you um, some thoughts and ideas about peacemaking. Especially, we're gonna bust some myths because we think this is particularly useful in this moment. Because we see sometimes peacemaking ironically being weaponized sometimes to tell us that we can't feel strong feelings or can't have opinions. So let's dive in, Sarah. Um, do you want to start with? Do you want me to name the first myth, or how do you want to start? You drive.
Yeah, well, I think it's maybe useful. Just as an organization over the last few days, we've had several women reach out, describing ways that peacemaking has been weaponized recently for them. They've talked about how people they care about, people that they love, people who feel really different and vote really differently than they do, uh, will use this really divisive language in the days leading up to the election, and then in the days following the election, they'll quote the peacemakers needed talk or all kinds of these really lovely peacemaking um, ideas that feel disingenuous to the rhetoric that they had used only a few days earlier, and feel also paternalistic, I think, in a way that feels coercive to like what their behavior should be now that they've lost now that they're feeling it differently than the people who are quoting the peacemaker talks are feeling. Is that fair, Emma?
I think that is a very common experience that we have, and I think there's a lot of reasons for it. We don't need to go into cultural, etc. So here's my question for you, Sarah. Do you see is peacemaking, does it mean being just nice to people that you don't like, disagree with, or that are mean to you? Like, what is that the definition of peacemaking?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think clearly I don't want to downplay the utility of kindness and gentleness. I think those are actually really powerful skills and capabilities that we can bring into the world. And I think we sell peacemaking far short when we reduce it in this like really watered down milk toast definition of being nice, being kind, smoothing over negative emotions, smoothing over conflict. Because that's not what peacemaking is. That's not the sort of peacemaking that Jesus Christ brought into the world. He expects something, I think, far more of us than just trying to avoid bad feelings and negative emotions.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a tough question, something that I've grappled with. So if someone were to try to define peacemaking in those what I would describe as more shallow terms and use it against you to ask to basically demand that you tone down your emotion or that you feel happy when they say that you're clearly not happy, so you must not be a peacemaker right now.
Right. You're experiencing fear, so
Yes. How would a peacemaker respond to charges that they are a false peacemaker? Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think really importantly, peacemakers have to be fully present in the world. You can't make peace unless you're like fully there, right? And so that means being brave enough to claim all of your emotions and experiences. And that's actually really hard to do. I think I'm very conflict averse and I'm very inclined to smooth things over and fawn and try like I'll freeze, and it takes, I think, actually real bravery and courage and skill and practice to be able to say, like, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, and I'm owning them, and I'm going to be okay with them. And like, these are what I'm bringing to this conversation, and that, like, I can't be anywhere other than where I am, and this is where I am.
Okay, so there's an authenticity that is helpful to be a peacemaker. And we're busting the myth right now that peacemakers don't feel strong emotions. This is
Yeah,
one I think is probably the number one myth that I see. I think
yeah,
within spaces is that if you need to be kind of floating on a cloud of like ethereal, uh, not just peace, but calm, that only people with a calm and exterior can be peacemakers. That passion is almost not a part of it at all.
yeah. And one thing that was really defining for me in my like understanding of what peacemaking actually looks like is I was involved in directing a film called The Abortion Talks. It screened several times through MWEG. It's now called The Basement Talks. And it's a story of these different leaders in the abortion movements on different sides of the debate who started meeting together in this super secret dialogue for 6 years after literal violence at abortion clinics, where like people were shot and killed at abortion clinics. And so emotions were really high when these dialogues started. I think, I've listened to these meetings on, they were recorded on cassette tapes, and there was many tears. There were many really, really tense moments throughout the conversations, but especially early on. And the personalities of these women were really different. Like some of them were these really sweet, lovely, uh, like baked as cookies when we came to interview them women, and others were like, one of them described herself as a bulldog, and one of them is like just this huge creative personality. And I think every single one of them, like from this really sweet person to the bulldog, described the experience of peacemaking as gritty, hard work. They didn't describe just like this lovely experience of becoming friends. They did become friends, but I think it's a complicated friendship. And the experience of getting there wasn't just like, you know, sharing ice cream sundaes or something. It was sitting together in their difference and learning to be okay with those differences, and learning to accomplish something beyond them in a way that felt, transformative, but also just really difficult. It wasn't a simple task, peacemaking.
I think that's one thing that I keep coming back to over and over again, is that peacemaking takes time and it can't be rushed. And so I think sometimes, in the name of efficiency or productivity, one of my, challenges is not stopping and like looking at a person in the moment that's really important when we're experiencing conflict, and taking the time to really listen, be curious, and work through it. Now, the reality is we have lives, we have kids to feed, we have work to do to make a living, we have callings to fulfill, we have places to be. And so I'm not suggesting that we basically walk around this eternal state of like, let's stop everything and fix everything right now, right? There are certain techniques we can use to I think there are Band-Aids that are perfectly reasonable to put on. But I will tell you, for me, like if when I'm in a peacemaking state, or I have the mindset of a peacemaker, the Lord will like inspire me to know when are those moments when I do need to pause, cancel, focus in, and really work at trying to understand the conflict I'm in. Like there are times when you have to kind of set the conflict aside, but if I'm really kind of listening, I get those whisperings of, now's the time you need to pay attention.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Emma, does it feel like you're coming into those times in like a weak position? Like, because I think that's often what women feel, is that peacemaking can feel really weak. Like you're responsible for everybody else's emotions in peacemaking, and you are responsible for accommodating everybody else's behavior, just sort of taking it upon yourself.
Yeah, I am definitely an accommodator by nature, and frankly, a lot of times by choice. And I don't see that as a weak position. I think if I'm choosing to accommodate in a situation in which that is what is needful for the relationship and for that moment, I think that's a reasonable and powerful thing to do, as long as it's a choice. So I don't see that as weak at all. I see that as actually being really powerful now. But it's what is really power. The most beautiful moments I've had are when I'm definitely a person, surprise no one, I like to get stuff done. I got lots of lists. I'm a very like, my favorite book when I was little was Cheaper by the Dozen. And it was because I like held up the dad as like the pinnacle of productivity and efficiency. I was like, I'm gonna have 12 kids and we're gonna have a household and we're gonna get it all figured out. Like that is like, I love, I see competency as being efficiency, getting stuff done. It's part of my identity and personality. So it has been a huge shift in my 40s, I'm pushing 50 now, to really like prioritize, like pausing and taking the time to go deep when it's warranted. And it's been a really powerful experience for me. And I've been able to really see the investment in relationships pay off. and become, frankly, a more trustworthy person. People trust me more when they see that I will stop and care for the relationship and not, merely accommodate the moment. I'm not saying I do that all the time or perfectly, but I've had enough experiences now to really like crave more.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I mean, with the abortion talks, the women agreed initially to 4 meetings, and then they realized that this is going to be a much longer project, right? And in the end, they met for 6 years before they really felt like they had done what they set out to do. Um, yeah, so I think peacemaking is a slow work, and that feels, I think, pretty frustrating sometimes, because it feels like you're getting nowhere.
Okay, so let's go to a couple other myths, and just so everyone knows, this is one grow that we're having right now. We have 2 events planned, one later tonight and one tomorrow midday, which Rachel can drop the details in the chat. We recognize that our community right now of MWEG members and friends can use some spaces to come together and talk about these tough things. So we're talking most about peacemaking today and about myths. We're also here to kind of reassure you, to the extent that this helps, that MWEG has been preparing for multiple election and post-election scenarios. And so the one that we are with is one that we have been working on for a long time. So we're not caught unawares, and we will, be as ready as one can possibly be for what comes. But the events tonight and tomorrow are going to be spaces for you to come together, to process together, to talk through, to get to know each other, and to continue some of these conversations. So, okay, so let's look at a couple other myths that I'm seeing floating around out there. Do you have to accommodate bad behavior in order to avoid conflict? Is that being a peacemaker?
Yeah, I think we've seen this where, yeah, I mean, again, just peacemaking is like allowing people to treat you poorly and turning the other cheek. And I think that's, again, I think peacemakers just have to be present in the world and have to be real about what they're experiencing. And so, no, I don't think that peacemaking is just allowing people to behave badly or treat you badly. I think the braver thing is to be honest, and to be very clear about what the expectations for behavior will be in a conversation. With the abortion talks, again, they had like really strict rules for engagement in the conversation, and moderators there to like keep the rules in place. That's obviously not always possible, or usually possible in our conversations with people we care about and people we disagree with. But I think certainly an expectation of goodwill and nonviolence and kindness as well, I think, is really important when we're trying to engage as peacemakers in the world around us.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when I've been faced with, and I've, working in politics full time means I've had lots of opportunities for people to be mad at me. And in some cases, I've told stories about this before in smaller settings. I've had experiences with fellow Christians and Latter-day Saints that have been quite stunning, in the ways that the things that they've said. And it's happened on social media, it's happened in person, it's happened privately behind my back. And I have really thought through in each different case. After I got over my initial, not got over, but after I processed kind of my initial hurt, because it was and I have a fairly thick skin, as you can all imagine. So I was actually stunned by the extent to which some pretty direct bad behavior directed at me affected me. So as I kind of thought through that and worked through it, I kind of took a different approach in different scenarios. So I had one scenario with a woman who had said something on social media, which I can't imagine saying anything worse about a person than what she said in a comment on one of my posts. It was something that it was cut at the core of my identity and who I was, and was essentially denigrating me in the deepest of ways. And in that case, I actually ended up not fully, I messaged her privately. I told her exactly how it made me feel. I said I wouldn't, if you had said that to another one of my friends on my page, I would have defended them vehemently and had been very, very, upset on their behalf. So I am now reaching out to you as though I was one of my own friends. I'm going to like defend myself in the way that I would defend a friend. But I did it. I really worked hard to do it in a way that did try not to put her on the defense, but was just super open and honest. I didn't assume intent. I worked really hard not to say this makes you a bad person because you say I'm a bad person. and I just let her know how I experienced it. And then after that, I chose to drop something off at her house for her birthday. I in that particular situation, I just chose to connect with her the best I could in a genuine way. I chose to find ways that I could connect with her genuinely that didn't feel forced or false. In another situation, I felt unsafe with someone in my in my orbit. And so in that situation, I stayed away. I didn't engage. It felt like it was not a good use of my time. And so I just kind of worked to process separately. So I think those are two examples. Any other examples that you would add of ways that we can engage with those who engage in bad behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I love how in both of those examples you acknowledge like the reality of vulnerability. It's a really vulnerable position to come to the table anytime there's any kind of conflict. And sometimes it feels, I think, possible to do that in a safe way, and sometimes it doesn't. Um, and both are real and both are okay. Uh, and yeah, I think mostly I would say like this work is so complicated and it's so hard and it's gritty and it's tough but it's like it still matters right now, and it's like maybe now more than ever, and it's not pretend and it's not stupid and it's not trite or weak. I think, Christ promises that peacemakers will inherit the earth, and I think that feels unintuitive, right? Because it's not like you're going to win the election. um, but I think it is a way of winning hearts and minds in a way that transforms the earth, and makes it better. I think that's the promise. I think is just as we're vulnerable with each other and as we navigate these really difficult relationships and really difficult conflicts in peaceable ways, that we transform the earth in a productive way, in a way that helps it be a more peaceable place for more people.
Okay, let's do one more myth, but I have just one thought first. As I keep using the phrase I'm doubling down on peacemaking, and I sometimes I worry that gets misinterpreted in the context of the myths that we're talking about right now. That gets misinterpreted that I'm saying to all of you again that you should be walking around in a cloud of peace at this moment in time. I think that's unrealistic. But here's one of the biggest reasons why I keep doubling down on peacemaking is one of the great challenges I'm seeing in politics right now is our sometimes inability or refusal to see each other as fully human. We have politicians, we have leaders who say things that denigrate entire groups of people, using phrases that dehumanize, that hurt, that have real impact. And that I do not want to understate how destructive that is. So for me, what that does is it increases my conviction to be someone who never does that, because I see what pain it causes. And it is probably one of the hardest things about being a peacemaker, I think, is to not return that in kind, or even, I'm not so worried that MWIG members are out there doing this, but it can be really easy to kind of boil the frog and to gradually slip into doing the same thing. It can be easy to dismiss someone based on how they voted, their political opinion. And sometimes I don't think at the beginning that I'm actually denigrating them as a person, but it can happen over time. And if I start to slip into that, I don't like who I become. And I don't want to be a part of anything that encourages that in any way, because I think that to me, that's the essence of peacemaking, is that it doesn't just transform the conflict, it transforms the people. And I only want to be a part of things that are transforming me and making me a better person. And I think peacemaking does that. But Sarah, does peacemaking always result in common ground, reconciliation, and agreement?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is like a hill that I will die on. I think there's a lot of really wonderful organizations dedicated to common ground right now, and they're doing excellent work. Um, and I think this is a real struggle for us as Latter-day Saints because we're taught that Zion is the people of Zion are one heart and one mind. Um, but I think it's simply not true that common ground is always possible, or I think actually even always desirable. I think people come from really different places and have really different experiences. And so the places that they arrive at are often really different. And expecting common ground is like an indicia of peacemaking is not realistic or helpful, I think, in many situations.
Yeah, I think sometimes setting up this expectation that it's going to lead to, perfect agreement is setting us up for failure. No, I agree. Any final thoughts, Sarah? We've kept everyone here for 30 minutes, and there will be, you have an opportunity to continue this conversation if you come to one of our events, either this evening or tomorrow. You can have the opportunity to talk about this. We're going to break into small groups depending on how many people are there. There's going to be MWAG leaders and facilitators there to do that. But if there's anything else that you would close on at this time, that peacemakers needed is what President Nelson said, right? And I think you and I both agree strongly with that. What would you say to our MWAG members as they are walking this volatile moment? I'm going to call it a volatile moment because I think it is. And it may be more than a moment. It's likely to be stretching out into a period of months and years. And, so what would you say to them that to help give them kind of the strength and conviction that they need to be, I'm going to call them powerful peacemakers, because peacemaking, I think by its definition, is a transformative and powerful.
Yeah, I think just don't buy into counterfeit peacemaking. It's not I think the peacemaking that's being weaponized increasingly is not real peacemaking. It's peacemaking is so much more than just being sweet and never experiencing bad emotions with other people. I think the sort of peacemaking that's required right now is a lot more complicated and a lot more complex. Like Mimi's iPad said in the chat, it's a really tricky line to walk of a big, warm, generous tolerance of people and not tolerating injustice. Those are difficult waters to navigate, but that's what we've been called to do. And I think that is actually, I think that's the work that the country needs right now, and the work that will ultimately be most successful in creating the sort of transformation that we're hoping to see.
So friends, we're here for you. We've prepared for this. We're here to help us all together navigate our need to connect and to make peace as we do the work. We don't see the work of advocating for ethical government as being one thread and the work of peacemaking and empowering women as being a separate one. We see them as two things that meet kind of in the space of peace building overall. So we will, we have been preparing for a very long time. We will have actions and ideas of things for you to do over the coming days and months. And we encourage you to do what Rachel put in the chat and think about, without waiting for permission, but reaching into your own kind of well of inspiration, what are some actions that you can take personally over the next little bit that can help, I think, channel feelings that you're having into productive action, or not. If you need to sit and worry for a bit too, that's perfectly okay. And we hope that you can find people that will do that with you and will love you through it. So thank you so much for coming today. Rachel, anything to close out? Let's turn it back to you to close out the event.
Yeah, so I put in the chat the times for our discussions today and tomorrow. You can find the Zoom link to that in MWAG Central. So hopefully you are all in MWAG Central. This grow will be recorded. So if it's something you want to share with anybody, fellow peacemakers, we would invite you to do that. It will, the link will be put in MWEG Central. It also will be in the Facebook discussion group. It's a YouTube link, so it's easy to share. But I just want to thank Sarah and Emma. Some of the notes that I wrote down, I loved embodying the quality of faith, and especially that of our mothers and our grandmothers and the women that came before us, and the women of the suffrage movement, and all of those people who have constantly been fighting for democracy and rule of law and all of those things. But I also love, as I was thinking, the word that came to mind as Sarah was talking about what it takes to be peacemakers was that it's, when she said it's gritty and it's long, that it's this refinement process. And that's something that we talk about in our faith a lot, this refinement of our testimony, of our spirits, but also of being peacemakers is a refinement too. And it's something that we're all learning together. So we're glad that you're here with MWEG to be peacemakers, to learn together. We have a lot of resources you can find on our website and in MWEG Central. So we encourage you to go and look for those things. And we hope that you'll join us later this evening or tomorrow midday to have discussions with fellow members. And until then, we'll say see you later. Next week, we're going to do media literacy with Meredith Gardner. And so we hope you'll join us then. See you guys next time.